Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. So we got a little bit of news about the 3.13 launch, and really the too long didn't watch version of this video is that the launch has been delayed until January, as you can see on the screen now. So, about a week ago, there was a blog post that was made by GGG developers talking about, and this was Chris Wilson, the overall director of the company, talking about how they made some planning errors in the lead up to the Heist League. And this put them on a very tight schedule. And then when there was a significant coronavirus scare in Auckland, which then caused there to be a lockdown of the city, this was the thing that meant that all those deadlines started to slip. And that's why we got to a situation where 3.12 came out, but the Twins encounter wasn't ready yet, nor was the Nash to the Slave encounter, and these have been patched in later. Now, they've said that two of the key things that came out of this how we're developing the next expansion differently post were that feature creep, i.e. just trying to keep throwing in more and more cool things without regard for how much that can cause deadlines to slip, was one major mistake that they'd made. And the second one was that they've just never really had a Black Swan event. The Black Swan event being something where something just unexpected happens that transforms all of your planning. It's named after the discovery of the Black Swan, which exists in Western Australia, but was largely believed not to exist. However, it's taken on a bit of a different meaning now, and it can be just anything that's disruptive and totally unexpected. Now, the Black Swan events that Chris talks about in this blog post, things like a key team member, an absolutely critical team member leaving the company, which hasn't happened in the time that they've been developing Path of Exile, or, for that matter, a pandemic breaking out and a second lockdown in Auckland. It's not that the lockdown on its own was enough to cause the problems with Heist launch. What it meant was that in conjunction with the feature creep had put them into a position where they were running really tight on the deadlines, and then the pandemic caused them to actually miss the deadlines. Now, Heist wasn't the worst League launch ever. That honor probably goes to Delve. For those of you that didn't play at the time, Delve was a broken mess on day one. So much so that the pretty much universal wisdom amongst people playing the League was don't go into the Delve mines at all. The main bugs that were killing people in there was the cart moving whilst it was desynced. So on your screen it appeared stationary, and in the actual gameplay it was moving along the track. However, this is before the origin point of a delve was lit, and so this would mean that you would see the cart standing still, so you would stay with it thinking, oh gee, this is really laggy and buggy, whilst actually your character is dying because of it's stuck in the darkness and the delve carts off somewhere else. Delve had lots of other bugs at launch as well. Flares were designed to work differently to how they do, and this essentially made them almost useless for the way that people instinctively use them, which is to throw them so that you get an immediate respite from the darkness. So throw them at the last possible second so that the darkness goes away. The flares didn't provide any light until they hit their destination point. All these things got patched and changed, and then Delve became a really successful League. But Delve was an absolute schmozzle on day one. Legion was pretty bad on day one too, and Synthesis was really bad as well on day one, although Delve was the worst. Anyway, Heist was probably pretty mediocre on day one, but the bugs that they were fixing and various balance changes that they made ended up taking so much time that getting the Twins and the Nash to encounter into the game took ages. So with that in mind, this was a post from Chris about that they didn't want this to happen again, and they wanted to get to a point where they were somewhat ahead of schedule on releases, which I think is a really good idea. And they're saying here that their goal was that 3.13 takes 50% the overall development hours of Heist, which means going from a situation with overtime to a situation with testing time, and yet still feels like a large December expansion. If you're interested, it's an Atlas expansion like War for the Atlas or Conquerors, with an in-area combat league and a few other bits and pieces. Anyways, it turns out that they have announced a delay until January. And there's two reasons for this. One, I think that even though this article says that they were on track with it, I think they may not be as on track as they want to be. But additionally, there's a competing game release, a major game release, Cyberpunk 2077. Now, this hadn't really been on my radar, but it's by the same company that produced The Witcher 3, which is one of the most popular RPGs of, well, certainly of the 2010s, but maybe even of the 21st century. And whilst I've never actually played The Witcher 3 all the way through. It's something that is on my list of games to play eventually. It's certainly something that a lot of people are hyped for. And GGG thought that their best plan was not to compete with Cyberpunk 2077 because they thought there'd be a huge overlap of interest between the two games. And as a result, they've decided to delay the legal start until January. Now, I'm not sure how much the overlap in interest is. Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't personally on my radar, although it may very well be an excellent game. And I'm curious to know how much you're interested in this game. I know that I was more hyped about World of Warcraft Classic, even though I didn't end up liking that very much, than I am about Cyberpunk 77. But of course, it's something that it's a decision that they've made. However, there is something that's really interesting. So firstly, they're saying we still expect to finish 3.13 by early to mid-December, and the scope of the expansion will remain the same. I think this would be great. If 3.13 can be in a finished state for all of December, and then can go live, say, on the 8th of January or something like that, that will be fantastic. And it'll give them time to go to work on 3.14, but it will also give them time to play test it, which is something that certain leagues would have benefited from tremendously. But so that you can still have some interesting Path of Exile stuff to play over the Christmas New Year break, we're planning to run at least one multi-week event, for example, Flashback. We'll confirm details of these events once we've put together a plan. I'm really looking forward to having some sort of event like this. I think there's a couple of reasons for it. Firstly, the heist economy has been broken. Now, that is something that's one of those things that a lot of people will say, well, just play solo self-found. The thing is that solo self-found is saying, I don't want to have access to rare items and rare events. I want the game to lock me out of them. That's fine. Some people like that. As for me, it's not really my thing. I prefer to play in groups occasionally. And also, I like to have access to a wide variety of goals to potentially chase, which I think doesn't mean that I'm a good fit for solo self-found. However, what the heist economy being in the state that it's in has meant is that essentially almost everything that can drop is worthless. The few things that can drop that are genuinely rare are extremely hard to trade for. And so what I'm talking about here is things like is trading for something like a headhunter. In a normal league, you will find that there's lots of items you can get that will make meaningful progress towards a headhunter. Maybe you get an Exile. That's 1% of your headhunter, maybe 2% depending on that league's economy. Maybe you'll get a Redeemer's Exalt, and that's 1% of your headhunter. Or maybe you will get an Impulse's Broken Heart, and that might be 3% progress. Maybe you'll get an All's Uprising, and that might be 20% progress to your headhunter. In the Heist League, essentially only the very rarest things are meaningful progress towards any of these goals. So Exalts still sort of are, but all currency orbs except for Chaos Orbs and Exalts are miles cheaper than they normally are against anything that you consider to be genuinely rare. All divination cards that would otherwise be chased, so things like the Queen's Sacrifice divination card, are extremely cheap in this league. Now that's good if you're wanting to trade for a Queen's Sacrifice, but if you're playing a variety of content, looking for a variety of cool loot drops, and then selling them in order to fund some chase item, and whether that be a headhunter or maybe it's something smaller, maybe your goal is a replica headhunter or a replica Farrell's Fur or something like that, something that's genuinely good. It's much harder to save up for big ticket items. This is the same economy that we had in Legion, but it's even more broken. Now, a few things I would like to say about this December event. I think we really need a balance pass for it. And that balance pass should include a few things. Firstly, if Heist is going to remain available during this multi-week event, then I think Split Beast and Fractured Fossils need to be drop disabled for it. Split Beast and Fractured Fossils have really made it so that certain blueprints are just broken. Blueprints, sorry. Certain blueprints, the most powerful blueprints just become absolutely broken when they can be duplicated. Item duplication in general in ARPGs is a bad thing, but the Split Beasts have been a problem multiple times with, and actually they needed multiple nerfs at the start of Bestiary before they got to the state that they were in, where they were sort of safe for a long period of time. But in this league, in the Heist League, they've just broken things. So have the Fractured Fossils. So I think that both of those need to be drop disabled. I also think that the Aura effect cluster jewels should also be drop disabled to see what effect that has on the meta. However, that's a few pretty big nerfs, and I think that there should be some significant buffs made to some of the least used Ascendancy classes, with a goal of bringing them up to about the current power level of the Champion. The Champion is what I would term a very solid middle of the range Ascendancy. It can do everything in the game, it can do all content in the game except Ultra Deep Delving, and it's competitive in several different builds. It's generally a very solid build, or a very solid character class all around. So I'd like to see a balance pass happen before this event, because otherwise we know what's going to happen. We've seen this before with the Synthesis Flashback League. The Synthesis League had a best build, and that best build was Winter Orb. Winter Orb was brokenly good at the time. And the Synthesis Flashback League was pretty much all Winter Orb builds. Essentially, every time you join a public group, you'd be joining with 4 Winter Orb builds. And that ends up being, it'll be refreshing to have a change, and I think that those changes would make that happen. It would actually make the heist content a lot more fun. So there's a few thoughts that I've got. Lastly, I did want to touch on the fact, sorry for the flashbang, that there's been an announcement of sorts that's really been buried on Reddit 3 weeks ago, that there'll be some form of harvest crafting in the core game. I'm really apprehensive about this because harvest makes it impossible to design, essentially, for anyone that understands harvest crafting, content that's designed for them will be unfathomably, unapproachably difficult for anyone that doesn't get harvest crafting. Harvest crafting adds more power to your character than an entire second ascendancy would. However, that requires you to have an extensive knowledge of how tags work, of all of the various possibilities. You need to really understand the ins and outs of item level, and as a result, I think that this is going to massively widen the gap between the top end players and the typical endgamer. Now, I don't think it's a problem that there's a gap between the top end players and the typical endgamer, but what I do think is a problem is that then all content that's designed needs to be for one of those two groups. Either it's designed for the people that get harvest, and therefore you're going to have bosses with 3 to 5 billion hit points. You're going to have the assumption that players move with 35% move speed plus Tailwind all the time. And yes, I am aware that Tailwind boots are a bit harder to craft under the new system because Tailwind has already lost all of its tags. It used to have a critical tag, it used to have a speed tag. It's going to have no tags on it, but you can still very easily deterministically craft ridiculously powerful boots by simply getting the Tailwind first and then building the rest of the boots around them. So all content is going to have to be designed around the assumption, or at least all content designed for endgame players is going to have to be designed around the assumption that our characters are absolute god tier. You'll have trash monsters with 20 million hit points instead of currently, 250,000 type hit points. That's necessary, otherwise everything is just going to be one shot by everyone that gets harvest. And that's then going to create a situation where this content that's designed for the people that get harvest is just going to be unfathomable to, unapproachable, completely off the planet difficult to the people that can't understand harvest yet. So they're going to then look at this content and go, oh, I took 16 seconds to kill a single white mob, and if it hit me, or whenever it hit me, it chunked me for 2/3 of my life. This isn't fun. I think ultimately that gap between the top end players and the sort of typical endgame player should be closed, not blown wide open. And the harvest mechanics blow it far wider than it's ever been before. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. That's a bunch of opinions as well as some discussion of the actual launch information. But if you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I hope you have a good one. If you found this video interesting, then consider hitting subscribe if you want more videos like it. Thumbs up if you want to see, if you want other people to be more able to find this video, and thumbs down if you think it was terrible and you don't want other people to see it.